Dear Diary, today I take the next step in being an ADHD life coach at Indigo Hub. I can't believe it's happening. I want to build, create, and discover a place for us to truly be ourselves. I think this journey will be the Indigo Diaries. Dear Diary, welcome world, and welcome to the Indigo Diaries and our Series 3, The World Through Our Eyes, with your host, me, Natasha Hickling. The Indigo Diaries is a podcast for those who want to learn about ADHD and neurodivergency through others and our own experiences. And this week, I'm very excited. I've had a bit of a break from the podcast because it's summer and it's been very busy. But I'm really happy to be back with Sarah. And if you didn't go, please go back to our old episode. I think it was episode 27 off the top of my head. I can't really tell you what it was, but I think it was number 27. But go back. I'll just tell you a little bit about Sarah. Sarah's a professional organiser and coach who now specialises in working with ADHD community. She's now living in Norway with her husband. So please go and have a look, and all of her details are below if you want to reach out to Sarah. And last time we were talking about decluttering, and not just literally decluttering our environment, but literally decluttering everything. So Sarah, welcome back.
Hi, thanks for having me back, Natasha.
So, and I'm curious, like, because obviously we were speaking last time a lot about like how it comes up in the neurodivergent world with decluttering, and we got very deep and about actually how cluttering the environment is in our heads and things like that. And any thoughts that you've had since our last conversation?
Well, I think one of the things that is worth thinking about is how we grew up, because that has quite a formative effect on us. So, for example, I grew up in quite a cluttered home. So there were 6 children in my family. So quite a lot of us lived in a big house. Pretty certain my mum had ADHD, although that was never identified. And she loved the project, but she hated doing the boring housework. I mean, who doesn't? So because of that, a few things came up for me as a child. So first of all, the house was never tidy. I can't remember one time in my whole life where the whole house was tidy. So sometimes we get one room or a couple of rooms tidy because we had guests coming, and there was always a bit of a panic and fluster. But in general, we grew up in a very cluttered, messy home, and it was a bit chaotic and quite often a bit dirty. And we were all very much encouraged to help with housework and chores and stuff, which I don't really regret, because I think it made me quite independent. By the time we left home, all of us could cook and clean and just kind of manage our lives. Mum was quite keen not to have to do that herself, to manage 6 children's laundry and so on. So we were all very capable, and I'm really grateful actually for that side of things. But I grew up always wanting to kind of create more order than I had around me. And so I can remember, for example, of quite an early memory. I was probably a young teenager, tidying up the whole kitchen from start to finish. And I went round, I don't know what was on my mind, but I spent probably half a day going around the whole kitchen, clearing all the surfaces, cleaning them all, you know, doing exactly what I would have done when I first started as a professional organizer, essentially, and creating order. And I think it lasted for probably about 2 hours, and then all started to deteriorate again, of course, because we hadn't changed, right? Our environment had changed, but we hadn't changed. So yeah,
I think that's quite important, like how our upbringings, culture, and kind of our frame of reference. If people don't know what frame of reference is, I'll put some details below, but a frame of reference is, because I think that take away the neurodivergency from it, that has a huge effect. And then when you add in neurodivergent, it's that life skills, right? Because for me, I was never grown up like my parents, bless them, they did it all for us. So when I went to university, I didn't have those life skills, and let alone when you're neurodivergent, it's really hard to have those. I find that a lot of people, a lot of teenagers and stuff, they don't have those life skills because they haven't been taught it. And then when you've got neurodivergent, when you find it really difficult to do these because they're really boring and all that, it just makes it so much harder.
Absolutely does. And I think, you know, my mum was a teacher, so she was good at teaching all that stuff too. But actually, my husband, you and I were talking about this before we pressed record. My husband grew up, again, 6 children, completely different family, completely different environments. And his home was always really, really tidy, but with almost no decoration in it, hardly any pictures up, so quite minimalist, we would call it now, and very non-consumerist. So they had a lot of furniture they'd had for decades, and it didn't change the whole time I knew them. So they weren't people who were buying and bringing loads of stuff in. And his mum did all the sort of tidying up and cleaning and stuff, so he didn't have to learn those skills again. So pros and cons. He grew up in a tidier home. He has a much lower tolerance of clutter than I do. I'm quite comfortable visiting people. I don't think I could do my job as a professional organizer if I couldn't cope with visual clutter. And I'm quite comfortable with it. I don't feel, you know, if it was my home, I would want it to be less cluttered. But I don't feel uncomfortable or judgmental when I go into somebody's house where there's clutter, what I would consider to be clutter.
Yeah. And this was, you were saying before about minimalist and kind of maximalist. Like, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, I noticed when I read accounts of minimalism when I first became a professional organizer, it's like lots of minimalists and have connections with professional organizers. And excuse me, basically what I noticed was every time I heard a minimalist talking about their lives, I would think to myself, oh, that sounds really like ADHD. So like often like really overwhelmed, taking on too many projects, putting their hands up for everything, buying loads of stuff, impulse control, basically. So, you know, issues around that. And their solution to that was minimalism, which is a strict set of rules about, and it varies. There are extreme minimalists, like, you know, Japanese minimalists I remember reading about, who literally lived on a mattress on the floor, which they'd roll up and sit on during the day, and they had a laptop and like one plate and spoon and so on. That's quite extreme. The concept of minimalism is that you get to decide what your minimalism is. So that might mean you've got 500 objects in your house, or it might mean, you know, whatever it means. It varies from person to person, but it does tend to be a lot less than most of us have. And that calms people down. It gives them space. It gives them headspace to concentrate on their work, maybe. And I would certainly say when things get too cluttered, it does have an impact on most of us in terms of how we function on a day-to-day level. There's a kind of low-key stress. And in fact, there was some research I was reading recently that backs this up, that you know, the more clutter there is in the background, the more that can impact our well-being. On the other hand, you know, there's some people with ADHD who go to that extreme and they have those strong rules. And then there's people at the other extreme who are just like buying lots of stuff, and they love pretty, shiny stuff. It's that magpie impulse that we probably both of us recognize. And that involves, you know, the accumulation of an awful lot of items in your home. And then what happens is, you know, you can't remember where you put things. So then you end up with multiples of different items. So there's kind of pros and cons of both of them. I think the minimalist side can be quite controlling and quite at times intolerant of other people interacting with that. And then the maximalist can be overwhelming, you know. So if you have a minimalist and a maximalist together, that would be pretty disastrous. And, you know, my husband and I are probably at different, I'm more maximalist than he is. He's more on the minimalist side, but both of us don't like it when it gets too cluttered for us.
Yeah, I would say that me and my partner are very much the same. Like my desk, like we've both got 2 screens on our desk and in our office, and my office is like stuff on the wall, stuff everywhere, and but it's all like there's no mess. It's all where it needs to be, and it's all put away. But if you go into his office, it's like 2 things on the wall, just his laptop, and that's it. And it's just that thing of it. it works, and then but it's when, you know, I suppose it's when minimalist becomes too far, and then when maximalist comes too far and it becomes cluttered and messy. And so I suppose it's the balance of both, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And also remember, there's that factor with ADHD where we need to keep things visible. So out of sight means out of mind. And one of the first things that I realized about my ADHD, and that I was able to explain to my husband, was that if he put things away in a drawer because he didn't like the external visual clutter, it was literally gone forever. So, and I might have mentioned that last time, but it's been a really significant learning for us, and that he's had to learn to respect that sometimes I need certain stuff leaving out, and he needs to check in with me before he hides it away, squirrels it away. So that's been important learning for us both. But so it's finding the balance for that, because the other side of the coin is that if we leave everything out as a reminder, you know, you end up with piles of stuff on the desk and you can't find stuff because there's too much stuff. The stuff that was there to remind you gets buried underneath other stuff. So, you know, it's finding a balance, really.
And like you and your husband, you start thinking you have it out, but then he checks with you. And we have a lot of bowls around our house. So like things go in the bowl. So it's contained.
There is something about putting something in a container that makes it feel less messy, isn't it? I think that's really interesting. That's like the sort of landing strip that a lot of people with ADHD find useful, having a bowl near the door where you put your keys and your phone and your whatever else, lipstick in my case. So it's like it's working out. I suppose one of the things is to work out, why is this important? You know, why is it important to sort of declutter or get organized? What's the motivation? And for some people, they don't want to. They're happy to live in the chaotic way that they live. But for most of us, there's a point at which we're like, okay, I can go so far, but not further, and I need to deal with some of this stuff. So that's what we're talking about. So without any judgment of people who choose to live in that kind of chaotic, cluttered way, there's absolutely no judgment on my part. If it works for you, that's fine. What we're talking about today is, what about for people who want to do something about it?
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing about acceptance as well, isn't it? Like sometimes just accepting that this is the way we are. Like I've accepted that people come into my house who are minimalist and go, wow, God, you've got a lot of stuff on the walls. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not messy. And they're like, no, it's just a lot. But then I go into a house and I'm like, God,
where is everything?
Yeah, where is everything? But it's like a showroom. But it's that thing of it's finding, accepting that that's the way you are. But what things do you notice in people when they realize they want to change the clutter?
Yeah, I mean, people don't go to a professional organizer unless they want change, right? So the biggest thing that comes up, the word that comes up in every first conversation I have with a client, is overwhelm. So there's this tipping point where it's got too much and you don't know where to start, and you don't feel able to do it on your own. It just feels like too big a problem to deal with. And that's where, you know, having some help can be really useful. And that help doesn't need to be a professional organizer. I'd be the first to say, if you've got somebody who's non-judgmental, who can support you and is reasonably organized, then that may be sufficient. So, you know, I'm not trying to sell my services in any way here, but it's more about recognizing that actually having somebody's help can be really useful. It has to be the right kind of help. So I can't tell you how many clients I've spoken to who, you know, they've said, oh, I had my friend come around to help me, but actually it was really awful because she had her own way of doing things, and she kept saying to me, why are you keeping that? You don't need that. And you know, so that's often people's experience before they hire a professional organizer, because they don't want that. They don't want that kind of judgment. They want to be able to make their own decisions. And you know, the kind of golden rule for professional organizers is you don't tell people what they need to get rid of. I think it's probably the biggest preconception that misunderstanding rather, that people have about our job. Our job isn't to come and boss you around and tell you what to get rid of. Our job is to give you some space to think about how you want things to be different, what you want to be different, why you want it to be different, and then help you practically to actually make that happen. So sometimes a really good place to start is to think, what is my goal here? So, it's not enough to say, I want a really tidy house. It's like, what do you want to be able to do with that tidy house? What's the point of it? What is our why? That's really important for us with ADHD, isn't it, to work out what our why is. So the first goal might be, for example, I'd like to be able to have my in-laws round to stay, but at the moment I don't feel comfortable doing that. Or I'd like to be with have friends around, but I'm embarrassed by the state of my house. So then, we can kind of dig deeper with that a little bit, and we can work out what you could do. So if they say want to organise a dinner party, let's put date in the diary and work towards that. And so that becomes the motivating factor. And we need to keep that motivation in sight. And it might even be that you decide, say you've got friends you want to invite around, you put a photograph of them on the table in the middle of all the clutter. And then that's a kind of little visual reminder of what you're working towards. So there's kind of, I would say there's two ways that people often want to sort things. They either want everything to be done all at once, like the whole house. They want it, they're fed up and they've reached a tipping point. Or they've just got one area that's really bugging them. And so working out how to get started is really important. And when I first started doing my job as a professional organizer, I would work round a room. Now I'm much more likely to kind of do a big sort first of all, because when we do that big sort and we so say, for example, we go into a space that's very cluttered and we say, right, let's put all the clothes in that corner, all the papers in that corner. That kind of idea where you're grouping things together into their obvious big categories, but you're not trying to make decisions about them. That gives you some mental energy to be able to a little bit of space, but immediately you'll feel in control once everything's in those big categories. So that can be really effective if you're trying to clear a whole room in one day. If you're trying to do like a smaller space, something like the table, then you might literally work from left to right or go around the table however you want to, sort of picking up each item individually and making decisions about it. And I think, in terms of how you declutter, it's like actually what we're deciding is, are we going to change our rules? So, maybe in the past, we've always kept all the birthday cards that people have given us. That's just one common example that I come across. And maybe that works for you, in which case, where are you going to store them and where are you going to be able to find them? Do you know where their home is? And can you just immediately pick up all the birthday cards from this year and put them in their home? So that might be one approach, but you might want to reconsider that rule and say, okay, actually, when I look through this pile of birthday cards, I realize that most of them just say, "Dear Sarah, happy birthday, love from." And actually, they don't feel very meaningful. That it's just literally what we do to remind people that we're thinking about them on their birthday. So actually, maybe I can change that rule and let go of most of those birthday cards and just keep a couple that feel really important, or even photograph a couple that feel really important or valuable. And then where do I keep those? So that's the kind of process that we'll go through, and challenging those internal rules we've set ourselves. It's like quite often we don't even realize that we've made a rule for stuff. So for example, we keep all of our official paperwork because it's official. So, do we need to keep, I know when I first started working, people would have printouts of all their paper bank statements, but they seem to be kind of really chaotic, and that's less of an issue now. But for example, do you need to keep last year's insurance documents? It's all that kind of stuff, isn't it? It's sort of challenging those rules and being prepared to sort of say, actually, I could keep everything, but then I'll have less space, or I could have more space by letting go of some of this stuff and changing the rules.
I really like this. It's almost like the bigger, like from what you've said there, it's like that purpose, because we need that motivation, we need that interest, that ink. But then when you try and do the task, even with that motivation, the actual condition to get started can be really hard, because it's like, I've got all this stuff. So it's almost like clearing the overwhelm and then tackling each thing by each thing and these rules. And I'm really curious about these rules. Like what I know it could sound a bit silly, but what is a rule?
If you would like any more information on Indigo Hub or our Indigo support group, then please check out our website below or our link to our social media platforms, or email at indigohub.adhd@gmail.com. If you would like to offer any comments, feedback, get support, or if you're interested in the world hearing your story, then please reach out through any of our avenues. As said before, have a positive week. Check in again later. And we're out.
Yeah, I don't know. I think quite a lot of the time we're not even aware that we've got the rule there. We've just literally kept the birthday cards because because we love the people, and letting go of them feels a little bit hard. People have different reasons why they keep stuff, and so in a way their rules need to relate to their relationship with the stuff. It's never just about the stuff, it's always about our relationship with it. So for example, my husband would ruthlessly throw out all his birthday cards, probably even the ones from me and my children. I tend to so I'm so sorry.
No, you're good.
I tend to keep all that stuff, because it feels important. It's not that he doesn't care about the people, it's just that he doesn't need that visual reminder. So there's, without any judgment, let's just accept the fact that we all have different feelings about our stuff, and that, and that's why it doesn't work having somebody come in and telling you, you don't need this stuff, because actually we might need that stuff. And sometimes, for example, as the day goes on, people get what's called decision fatigue. So they start to do what I call the ADHD toss, where they they're like, oh, I had enough of thinking about the stuff now, I just want to get rid of it all. And they kind of go into this extreme mode. And my role there is to actually just bring them back and say, okay, should we slow down? Can we slow down a little bit? Just take a break. Because I'm noticing that now it's harder for you to kind of make a decision, so you're just tending to let go of everything. That's when people come back and regret it, and they say to themselves, oh, I threw out all this stuff because I was really ruthless and now I regret it. So that's why managing the time that we have is really important, particularly if we're doing it with a friend. I work quite often with people over a whole day, so it's something I have to be careful of. That's not happening. But if you're working on a half-day basis, that's probably less likely to happen, I would say. So if you're working with a friend, probably a half-day chunk is about the most that I'd recommend.
And then come back to it. But for me, these rules are almost like beliefs. It's this, what's important to us, what are our values, and like, I used to have a baby box where my mum would like keep everything in, and then I used to do it and I'd keep all this stuff. And now when I look back, I'm like, that's nice, but actually like it doesn't really mean anything now. So now I can start to clear it out. But a lot of these things that you were saying there is beliefs. That's why as coaches, we don't tell people what to do or how to act, because we're not them.
No, exactly. And this is what I started to learn when I was working with clients, was that actually, part of listening to clients means that they will have different values about stuff. And actually what's really important is that I understand how important this particular thing is to them. And then sometimes it's about honoring that thing. So for example, I remember once a session with a client where we'd been unpacking some of her dad had died a couple of years, suitcase, and most of it was just going to go to charity. And we were just working together, sorting it all out. And then I looked around at one point and she was standing up with a fur coat of his and she was crying. And I was like, let's just chat, let's stop for a minute and just talk about this. And what happened was that she hit a piece of clothing that was really evocative of her dad and really important to her. and it had been buried in this suitcase. And so what we did after we talked it through was we just hung the coat up on the back of the door so that she could actually see it and sort of think about it and wonder what she was going to do with it. And I don't actually know what she ended up doing with it in the end, but I think the important thing is to kind of recognize the depth of emotion and not just ruthlessly declutter because we're trying to be minimalist. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. And I suppose it's about meeting them where they are, and like, or if people are doing this in themselves, it's, what is the purpose here? Is it to declutter your whole house, to be a minimalist, or we can't, our space is very much representation of us, right? We can't change our space because we've got to live in it. We can't change our space to be completely different to who we are. And I think it's so in depth. I know we're talking about decluttering your house, but there's so many layers to it. Like, that fur coat.
Yeah. When I first started my business, people would often refer to themselves as declutterers, and I don't think I've ever referred to myself as a declutterer. And I think it's partly because I don't see that as my role. I see my role as being to help people sort through their belongings and make new decisions about stuff. So it's not about decluttering necessarily. Sometimes it might be keeping something, or maybe framing a picture and putting it up on the wall so you can see it and enjoy it rather than having it buried. It's not just about getting rid of stuff. Sometimes it's about honoring stuff as well.
Yeah, and that just reminded me, like, as my role as a coach, it's not to change their life. It's not, I'm not a declutterer where we're going to take everything out that you already know and make this new thing. It's to work with what we've got, accept that where we are, and to, find ways to make it, sort through all this stuff to make it better, rather than, changing somebody who somebody is. And I suppose that's, like you said, those rules is looking a bit beneath that. And, why did you want to keep that? What makes that important? Can we do it in a different way? So it's not 58 birthday cards. Can we take a picture of you rather than actually just get rid of them and that's it?
Exactly. No, I think there are a lot of similarities there between coaching and the work that I do. And it's very much about examining it from a different perspective, looking at stuff from a different perspective with fresh eyes, because like I said about the rules, people have these rules, they don't even think about them from one year to the next. They're not even aware that they've got all about stuff. And you say to them, so what, why are you keeping that? What's that about? And then they start talking, and then you're like, what about this? Have you thought about a different way of looking at something, for example? So, it's that kind of reviewing all of those different rules and reflecting on them, and being prepared to say, actually, that rule's not serving me because it's meaning I'm ending up with piles of bank statements and I don't need them. So actually, what are my new rules? And for some people, particularly if they also have autism, having extra structure, having a clear kind of set of boundaries can be really helpful, because it gives you something to hang on. And it also means you're not having to think about every single individual item, because you know what the rule is that you've set for yourself. And that rule might be, for example, I'm going to keep bank statements for the last year, because then that's all I need, because I need to be able to review them when I do my tax return. And then when it comes to next year, beginning of the next year, you go back and you literally pick up this pile of bank statements and they go straight in the shredder, or they get obliterated, or I can tell you about that magic tool that I use. But just to think about it from a practical point of view, I think it's the getting started that's quite often the challenge for people. So get started. Sometimes it can be enough to be accountable to people. So, for example, what I've done before is I've said on Facebook, right, I'm going to do my tax return today. See you all later. So it's a kind of public accountability in a light-hearted, jokey way. So sometimes there's that kind of accountability part where we tell somebody else, this is what I'm doing, this is my intention, I'm going to get on and do it. So that might be enough. Another way that I sometimes do things is I'll set a timer for myself. So if it's something that I'm really resisting, I'll say to myself, okay, I'm just gonna I don't know, spend an hour in the garage, for example, clearing out the garage, and then at the end of that hour, when the timer goes off, permission to leave. Now, what I find is, in classic ADHD way, once you get started, you get stuck in. And
you do,
that's fine, so long as you're not going to hyper focus and then be still there at 3 o'clock in the morning. We have to send in a rescue team for you, or whatever.
Not had dinner or not slept.
Yeah, exactly. So that can work in one way to initiate things, but we need to be careful we don't go too much into hyper focus. But another way of doing it is to sort of set yourself another limiting challenge by saying, right, I'm just going to do, say, 2 drawers or 1 shelf or whatever. So every time you're setting yourself a kind of boundary, you're saying, this is all I need to do, and then it will be finished. And so it might be that you just say, right, I'm just going to sort the table. Another thing that can be really a fun way of doing it is to take a picture beforehand and take a picture afterwards. And you don't need to do anything with those pictures. You can keep them for yourself. But quite often we forget, when we've cleared it all up, we forget what it looked like beforehand. It's really satisfying to look back and say, oh, I hadn't realized how much I've got done today. So those are just a few sort of practical things to think about in terms of actually getting started with the job.
Well, like you said, once you get started, but it's just that first, like, starting with an easy task, like you said, like going in and sorting it first, and then going where your boundaries are. I think that's when people think decluttering has to, oh my goodness, which room first, and it becomes so, like you said, when clients come to you, overwhelming. And it's, how can we make it easier? How can we have an in, with whatever that is? I have a client that she does the same thing. She actually puts the picture of her dirty room on her phone, screenshot, so every time she looks at it, it's just there, because she knows that she doesn't really mind the dirty room, but other people in the house do. So it's just it's how can you bring it to the forefront of your life and make it easier, so it's not such a big job.
Absolutely. I think that whole, sometimes we are not satisfied unless it's all done perfectly. That perfectionism often kicks in at this point. And I'm sure we talked about this last time, but the perfectionism of the kind of, I'm not even going to get started because I can't do it properly. That's the thing that gets in the way, and that people with ADHD often don't see that as perfectionism, but it totally is. It's like, unless I can do this properly, there's no point in me even starting, so I'll just carry on dropping my knickers on the floor. Whereas actually I always call myself a recovering perfectionist. We need to challenge that stuff and just say, I just need to get started, just need to do a bit. So even if all I do is pick up all the dirty laundry and take it down and put it by the washing machine, that might be enough for today.
It's that thing of momentum. It's like it, which I think we don't talk about enough. It's more like, how can we, motivation, but then when we think about the whole picture, it does seem so overwhelming. It's that momentum. How can you pick it up? If it's one thing a day, it's one thing a day. It's better than doing nothing a day, or doing it once every 6 months and doing it all and then not doing it for 6 months again.
Something that comes up often in coaching sessions is that idea of moving towards, we tend to think about it in terms of, I want to get fit, therefore I'm going to run 5 miles every day. And we'll often talk about, what could you do to move towards that goal, and how will you manage it if you don't get as much done as you hoped. And kind of managing those expectations is a really important part of doing this kind of job, because you might say to yourself, okay, I'm going to do my bedroom today, and then you get about halfway through, say it's midday, and you realize you've only just done 1 set of chest of drawers. Now that is not the point to sort of give up and say, oh, there's no point. At that point I would celebrate what you've done and just acknowledge the fact that it's taken longer than you thought it was going to take. So now you have to manage your own expectations and say, okay, this whole project is going to take me a bit longer than I thought, but I've made progress towards it. I've spent a whole morning and I've got this done, and let's celebrate that stuff. Because quite often it's that sort of falling off the wagon feeling. We feel like, oh, as soon as we drop a pair of knickers on the floor, that's it, it's all pointless. There's no point in even doing it in the first place.
We've got to go back to square one.
Exactly. But then we give up. We're like, oh, you see, it never worked. in that kind of extreme ADHD way. So it's like challenging some of that stuff and saying, okay, I'm just moving towards it. It's like a bit at a time. I'm making progress. You know, when I first worked as a professional organizer, running a workshop, and I kind of had to, you know, my job was all about basically persuading the client to let less into their lives, to let more out of their lives, and then to organize what's left. That's it. It's not rocket science. You know, being a professional organizer is not a complicated job. That's all we're doing. And we're supporting the complicated bit of our work is actually supporting the client, you know, psychologically. The practical stuff is the easy bit, right? It's not rocket science. You don't need a degree to do it. But you do need to get started, and you do need to be letting less stuff in and letting more stuff out, and then organizing what's left. That's it, really. I said that in the first 5 minutes, couldn't we?
No, but then it's then how do people take that and actually do it? But like what you're saying here is you're giving people the way to, it's almost, that's the formula, and then how do we actually make that into our lives? And what I'm hearing is these real practical, easier ways to make it not so scary. Because I think that we have we talked about the stigma about it last time, but there's just so much stigma about it, and it's thing of environment is so important, especially when we're neurodivergent. I mean, for everyone it's important, but because it's your place you go and all that, so it's just so important to have that space.
Totally. No, it's really significant thing, our space, and I think we don't think about it in those terms. We think about it as just a moral failure, don't we? We sort of look at it as a moral failure, but actually it has an impact on us. It's part of our self-care almost, sometimes, dealing with this stuff, and being prepared to sort of challenge some of those sort of earlier held beliefs or rules, as we were talking about. I'm having a quick look at some of the notes that I wrote down, and one of the things I've written down is if what we do is going to stick and work, basically we need to make it easy to find things, and we need to make it easy to put things away, because those are the challenges, right? The big frustration for us with ADHD is we're kind of going into maybe quite a cluttered space, and we're like, oh, I can't find anything because it's all piled up or whatever. The goal for me, for my home, is that I can find any piece of paper, any document I'm looking for within less than 5 minutes, and that I can find anything really in my house within less than 5 minutes, because everything kind of has a home. And that's the point where I feel really 50s housewife, because just saying, you know, home for everything and everything in its place, it's so kind of irritating, isn't it? But the reality is that when we know where our stuff is, it makes life a lot easier. So actually, when I was clearing, my husband and I were doing a big tidy up on Saturday, because he was overwhelmed with the messiness of the home. What we did was we gathered everything together, and then we worked out, we've just recently moved countries, so things don't always have a perfect home. So we were like, okay, where are we going to keep things? Let's be really clear about where these things belong. We didn't actually declutter anything because we didn't have too much stuff. But we put everything back in its place, and in some cases we rearranged things so that place made sense and made it easier. So for example, you know, just a simple example, cleaning your shoes. If the shoe cleaner is in the kitchen, but the place where you keep your shoes is in the hallway, that's not going to work very well, is it? So think about where you store things and make it make sense to fit your processes. So make it as easy as possible for you to use the stuff that you're using. So, you know, one of the things that we often talk about as professional organisers is zoning. We talk about that idea of, you know, the toothbrush principle, of having your toothbrush by the sink and so on. You know, you've got your teacups and your tea leaves and coffee and all of that stuff all together near the water, near the kettle, ideally. That's the dream. It's not always possible, depending on the layout of our kitchen, but you know, we want to make things easy for ourselves so that things don't get in a mess, because if you can't put it away easily, you'll just put it down and then it will still be there a week later. You know, just acknowledging that and thinking about what's going to make it easier for you. So it might be having empty open bins without lids. It might be having things in clear containers so that you can see immediately what's what. If I had my children today, I had 3 children in less than 5 years, so kind of packed in together.
Wow.
And if I was doing my time again, that kind of early, you know, school years, I would probably put like a coloured ribbon on their book bag, on their, you know, lunch bag, on all of that stuff, so that like child A has got everything green, child B has got everything blue, child C has got everything red, whatever. You know, find a system that works for you so that you can group everything together. Ideally get the child to be independent, you know, be able to put their book bag and lunch bag and hang it on their hook so that they know where it belongs and they can put it away. If you make it easy enough for them to do it, they'll do it. If you make it easy enough for you to do it, you'll do it. And if it's not working and you're finding that things are constantly ending up being left out, it's probably that you need to come back and think, what would make that easier for me? How can I, you know, review that and think, okay, actually, it's a bit silly keeping that particular thing there. Let's put it somewhere else.
Yeah, because like you said, it's not just about decluttering and getting rid of stuff. It's about creating the systems that are going to, you know, one of my clients says, I need to be in flow. You know, I need my house to flow rather than this, we're going to clean it once and that's it. You know, it's got to flow. Is it that you've got to put a hook here or this here? It's really, you've got to think about how not only declutter and all that, but also how are you actually going to live in your space and how to make it easy for yourself. That
organizing piece is really important. And the other thing I'd mention as well is that vertical storage is really useful for us with ADHD. So by vertical storage, I mean things like, for example, hooks on the wall. So, you know, being able to hang a coat up easily on the hook rather than having to fiddle around putting it on a hanger, for example, that's going to make it easier. But also, for one of the things that I often recommend to people is to put their spice jars on the back of a door. You know, the inside of a cupboard door, you can get spice racks that go on the inside, rather than have them in a cupboard where you've got to kind of rifle around and try and find, you can't see the label because the label's on the lid or whatever. Put them on a wall somewhere where they're really visible easily. And in terms of things like, you know, clothes and filing, vertical filing works really well there. So, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with the KonMari approach for folding stuff. Now, for some people with ADHD, that is going to be a step too far and completely fine. No judgment if you decide not to go down that route. The one advantage of it is that once you've folded things and put them away, you can see everything that's in your drawer. It takes up less space. And it's like a series of books in your drawer. Like you can see every book, you can see the title of every book, you can see where every t-shirt is. So that can work really well for people with ADHD. Actually hanging things on a hanger, if you've got a wardrobe and you decide, actually I'm going to hang everything rather than put it in a drawer, that's another form of vertical filing. You just need to make sure you've got enough rifle room so you can, everything's not so jammed in that you can't actually dig things out. And you know, vertical filing in terms of paperwork can be really effective too, because you know the old kind of traditional filing cabinets, actually they work really well for ADHD. Because you can open them up really easily. So long as you've labeled things, you can literally rifle. There's something about rifling through stuff, being able to pick out one piece of paper individually really easily. Whereas if you've got them in a drawer, you know, like those drawers with lots of, they're not so good for ADHD because you actually have to take out everything that's in the drawer and have a look at them to find one piece of paper.
It's how can you create the least steps, like so automated. That's why I say in my life, like I need it to be automated so it's just so easy. So any other kind of practical tips that you've got as we're coming to a close here?
I don't think so. I think I've covered the main
Mm.
areas. I mean, I love my, people laugh about this, but I love my labeling machine. And when I get it out at clients' houses, they get quite excited because it's like the little treat at the end. Let's label everything so you can see things. So obviously, if you've got things in clear containers, that might not be necessary.
No, yeah.
That can be a useful tool, and it could be your treat for, decluttering space. I'm going to buy myself a label machine. And so the other thing, I can send you links for these tools actually,
Oh,
because
please do, yeah.
there's a couple of them that are kind of quite handy. I mean, sometimes I use post-its as labels. I'm quite fond of post-its, as you can see on my Kanban board. But there's also this tool that I call the obliterator, but it's not actually called that. I think it's called an ID camouflage roller. And you roll it out if you're going through paperwork and you're nervous about discarding stuff because of your own identity being on it. You just use this roller to kind of obliterate. You just go and it obliterates the name and address, and then you can just put it in the bin. So it's a good alternative to shredding, because when you're shredding a lot of paperwork, it's actually really time consuming, because what happens is the shredder heats up and then it, you have to
You've got to leave it
jammed, or
yeah.
Such a pain in the neck. So, and I've used this particular tool when I was working with somebody with hoarding disorder, and we were going through a lot of paperwork, and it was really fast, much faster than using a shredder.
Wow.
So
I might need that, because my shredding pile, they're just all on top of the shredder. They're on top of the
there you go. You see,
they need to be shredded, but they're just, because it takes so long and it's loud.
Yeah. This is just kind of obliterate as you go, put it in the bin straight away there. It's like declutter at the point of entry. As soon as you decide you want to get rid of it, get rid of it. So I will send you the links for a label machine and a obliterator. That's what I call it.
Brilliant. But like you said here, it's let's make it as easy as possible so we can keep it going.
Exactly.
Any last thoughts or anything? Like I'm taking away a lot, I've got a new thing to go buy, so I'm very happy. But any last thoughts or kind of things that you kind of want to leave us with?
Well, I think that the last thing that I can think of is that people are often surprised by how much fun they have during a session when we're sort of sorting through a space. And I would encourage you to find ways of making it fun for yourself. If you're doing this yourself at home, put some high energy music on, make yourself a nice treat here and there. Come up with a reward at the end of the day. So you might say, oh, once I've done this space, I'm going to go out and have a coffee and have a piece of cake, or whatever it is that you treat yourself with. Acknowledge the effort that you're putting into this and reward yourself, and and then enjoy the fruits of your labor, because it's really satisfying. I mean, I don't have to do a big sort out very often now in my home, but just clearing out a shelf every now and again is really satisfying, and everything feels more organized at the end of it and less overwhelming. So
and like you said there, I like that. How can we make this fun? Because it doesn't have to be, I know we put it in our minds that it has to be this like, massive thing, but how can we make it easy but also fun, so it's enjoyable and then it makes our brains want to do it?
Exactly. And that's the hack, isn't it? Find a way of doing it that our brains will want to do.
Not only I've got a purpose of having an event, but then make it less stressful.
Exactly.
I love that. Okay, well, thanks so much yet again, Sarah. I'm taking away a lot from this personally, so I can imagine a lot of other people are. And if you are struggling and you don't have that supportive friend, then reach out to Sarah or other people in the professional organising business, because we all need that help sometimes to be able to find that system. If you just, even after this session, like, well, this is so overwhelming, I can't, then reach out, because there's people like Sarah out there.
Absolutely. Apto, they've got a new shiny website now, and there's lots of professional organisers on there, and quite a few of them are specialised in ADHD. So go find help if you need that help.
And I've got that from when we last spoke, so I'll also put that as a link below.
Great.
But thanks so much again, Sarah. I really, really enjoyed it again.
You're really welcome. Lovely to talk with you, Natasha.
So if you're interested in coming on as a guest, pick your brain, have questions, or you just really resonated with this story, then please reach out through our social media avenues and email. All the details and everything is below as always. Come learn, listen and experience the world through not my eyes, our eyes. Why not? Have a good week, make it easy and fun. You heard it here. And we're out.
Dear Diary, as Indigo Hub's process goes on, it makes me stop and wonder, could there be more for us? More light, more experience, and more ways to see the world through our own eyes? I think this journey will be... Shh.